So I want to be honest with you here. I am a really shit mover. All these exercises that you see me doing here, I do them on a weekly basis in order to improve my movement quality. I struggle more than the average person out there, and I'm continuing to do these exercises to improve my movement quality. If you've been stretching your hip flexors for months and they still feel tight, in this video, I'm going to walk you through 4 exercises that I use with my clients and athletes to improve your movement quality, strength, and resilience of your hip flexors. What most people don't understand is that the position of your pelvis will have an influence on the length-tension relationship at the hip flexor. For example, if I'm in an excessive anterior tilt, it's going to place a greater stretch on the hip flexor. Now, there's nothing wrong with an anterior tilt. Okay, so I just want to make that very clear. The issue that we have is if you can't extend your hip well and you can't get out of the hip, you're going to place a greater stretch on that hip flexor where it's going to feel tight, when most likely it's just probably weak. So the first exercise we're going to go through is a sled march. Okay, so all I've got is a sled. I've got a lightweight on the sled. I'm just going to pop this strap around my waist. I'm just going to step in. All we're going to do with this exercise is we're just simply going to walk. And as I'm walking, I want to think about trying to extend my hips, stand up nice and tall. So basically, when we're coming up here, I'm essentially extending one hip, flexing the other, creating big shape changes between one side extending and one side flexing. As I bring the knee up into flexion, I'm bringing my elbow towards my thigh. So I'm getting this slight cross connect happening where I'm getting a bit of rotation through my thorax. And I'm just going to step out and keep switching sides. As I'm switching sides, I'm really focusing on trying to stay tall and extend that hip as I bring that elbow towards the knee. Now, if you are doing this exercise, the rep scheme is just seriously chase a good stimulus, right? As long as you can feel good hip extension happening and you're getting a nice fatigue around the glutes, you're going to feel a fantastic stretch through the hip flexors. I would recommend, I personally do this as a warm-up every single day. I'd recommend dragging the sled for maybe 20 to 30 meters for a total of 3 sets. Okay guys, exercise number 2, this is the hip flexor sit-up. If anyone has had any hip or groin issues, you're gonna love this one. I have personally, I tore my groin during BJJ practice, and this has been a game changer in improving my hip flexor strength and resilience. So all you're gonna need is a 30 kilo dumbbell or something, doesn't have to be 30, but for me, if it was any lighter, I'd probably fall backwards on this exercise. What you wanna do in the setup position is make sure your foot is underneath the dumbbell. I've got like a 90-degree angle from my hip to my ankle. I'm going to obviously just come up here and hold on to my opposite leg, and this is going to be up in flexion. And this is essentially just going to give me a bit of balance for the first couple of reps. I'm going to eccentrically load myself back down into this big stretch where you'll see that I'm extending my hip and then coming all the way back up. So I'm essentially loading myself down into a big stretch where you'll see that I reach full hip extension in the bottom, and then I'm getting a real nice isometric contraction through the front of the hip flexor here. On the way up, pulling myself up back to the top of the rep. I'm then controlling myself down again, focusing on getting good hip extension. Now, what we see here with a lot of people is you can load this up with dumbbells, right? You can make this harder. And what happens is people go really low, which is great if you can go low, but what they end up doing is extending their spine instead of extending their hip. The whole point here is we want to get the hip extending so that we can really focus on targeting the hip flexors. So when you're doing this exercise, guys, you don't have to hold on to your leg. If you're comfortable, you can keep your hands on your waist. You can move around, you can hunt around for different parts to get a different stretch somewhere else, or you can hold a weight to make it harder. Just for the purpose of today, I'm just showing you how to do it. Now, I would recommend a slow tempo, something like a 4-second eccentric, and I would recommend a 1 to 2 second pause in the bottom, really trying to focus on extending your hip. The rep scheme could be 4 to 6 reps, 6 to 8 reps. I wouldn't recommend any more than that, especially if you're new to that exercise. Okay, exercise number 3. Now we're going to be training the hip flexors with the knee behind the body, moving up into hip flexion. Another fantastic exercise that I think is really great to isolate the hip. All you're going to need is a strap. A cable rack works best for this. If you don't have a cable rack, you can use a band. You also need something for balance. Ideally, if you had 2 broomsticks, it would be fantastic. I don't have that. I'm just using a mace here to give me a bit of balance. Just pop the strap around your ankle. Gonna walk out, get some tension. Gonna use something for balance. All I wanna do from here is I wanna bring that knee up into flexion, right? So I wanna make sure that I've got enough space away from the cable so I can pull, or I can let that cable pull that knee behind the body so I get really good hip extension on this side. So I'm training the hip flexor through a full range of motion. What we don't want to see is massive amounts of extension and then pulling through, right? So we want to make sure that we're just going back to where we feel a decent stretch and we're not overextending in that position where we've got good hip extension. I'm then going to bring the knee up into flexion. So I want to bring that knee through and I want to stand tall, nice and tall, getting the head up tall. I don't want to flex. I want to be up nice and tall with good hip extension. Now, what you'll notice when you're doing this exercise is that the leg that is supporting on the ground, you're going to feel a burn in the glute because you're going to be extending that hip as you're flexing this hip simultaneously. So coming through, standing tall, coming up and squeezing, bringing that knee up into flexion. Guys, just to add to this, you don't always have to just bring the knee straight up. Right? You can also bring it across the body. You'll see this in sprinters where they're coming out of the blocks and they're going to get that femur across the midline. So basically when they're coming up, you can actually get some more adductor happening here. You can get a bit more hip flexion happening, more with the knee coming across that midline, and you can play around with these positions. I personally like to externally rotate the leg a little bit more and then bring it up into hip flexion where I get a bit more sartorius and also a bit more adductor while I'm doing this as well. Play around and hit different parts that feel better for you. Now the rep scheme that I recommend when you do this, 12 to 15 reps. You can go heavy on this, you can build volume, you can progress it how you like. Ultimately, we would like to get a lot of load on here and train your hip flexors heavy over time. Final exercise of today is a skip. We're going to be doing some skips where we're training the hip flexor and extensors at high velocity, trying to get some good hip separation here. Now, guys, I want to let you in on something. I want to be honest with you here. I am a really shit mover. All these exercises that you see me doing here, I do them on a weekly basis in order to improve my movement quality. I struggle more than the average person out there, and I'm continuing to do these exercises to improve my movement quality. So what we're gonna do is just get a bit of a run up. I'm just gonna demonstrate it first, then break it down, okay? And if you're watching this at home, try not to laugh, okay? So as you could see there, all I'm doing is I'm skipping, like you would have done this when you were a kid, right? And we lose that playful side, unfortunately. All I'm doing is I'm moving at a high velocity where I'm getting a bit of a skip, I'm getting some plyometric going, some reactivity off the ground, and I'm extending and flexing the hip at a high velocity. Now, not all contractions are slow, and we need to be able to kind of train tissue through a polarity of different types of contractions. And what I mean by that is, yes, isometrics are great. Yes, heavy eccentric loading is great, but you also need to do things at high velocity to prepare the tissue for real world demands. So back again, extend. You don't have to move super fast through it. Once you get a bit more comfortable, you can start to really improve your speed and the distance that you do it at. Now, if you're starting out and this is new to you, I recommend maybe 30 meters, doing 5 to 6 sets of 30 meters at the back end of your session or at the end of these exercises. Just a recap, we went through 4 exercises today. Not all of them were based on hip flexion. The first one we went through was hip extension, where we're going through that sled march. The rep scheme there, like I said, choose a weight that is challenging for you, but also not too heavy to the point where you end up just kind of grinding through the reps. You want a consistent march all the way through, anywhere from 20 to 30 meters for 3 to 5 sets. The second exercise we went through was a hip flexor sit-up, where we're actually getting the knee, or eccentrically loading that hip flexor, getting that knee behind the body, which is going to create a fantastic stretch there. The rep scheme there was 6 to 8 reps per side with a slow tempo of maybe a 4-second eccentric. The third exercise we went through was the cable pull through. Now the cable pull through, eventually we want to load it heavy. The rep scheme there was 12 to 15 reps, and we showed you maybe three different positions where we can train that femur coming across the midline and then away from the midline to just stress different parts of the hip flexor, the adductors and the sartorius. The last exercise we went through was one that I really suck at, was the skip. Now the skip is something that trains the hip flexor and extensors at slightly higher velocities where you're moving through locomotion. Again, you can keep the volume high on that. It's not too intense on the body, and it's something that you could do as part of your velocity block as a warm-up. Now, to do all these exercises in one session, I wouldn't recommend it. I'd probably start with picking 1 to 2 exercises and breaking it up as part of your movement prep before your next S&C session or before your next skills practice with combat sports. Guys, I really hope you got some value out of this video, and if you got any questions, leave a comment below. Stay tuned for my next episode, as we're going to be talking about punching power and the nuances behind the barbell punch and why it doesn't work for explosive power.